Well, coming up next, Father Barry Bercier, author of the book The Skies of Babylon. Barry talks about his book, his life as a priest and teacher, and his unique experience during his time in Israel, what it means for both Jews and Christians.
I'm Father Barry Bercier. I'm from the U.S., New England. I've been stationed here at St. Peter in Gallicantu for this past year, although I've been coming here for a long time. I first came here in 1984, the summer before my ordination. The Assumptionists asked me to come here when my superior said, "Would you go to Jerusalem?" I said, "Jerusalem? No, I don't want to go." I had no interest. It was never part of my life plan. The alternative that was offered me at that time was so boring. I said, I'll do anything except to do that. So I came to Jerusalem. But I ended up going, and it changed my life dramatically. It changed my understanding of Christianity. And it did it just before I got ordained. So it's produced kind of an ongoing crisis in my religious life. But yeah, coming here and seeing Israel and seeing learning the story of the Jewish people caused me to look at Christianity from quite a different angle than what I had been used to up until that time. I didn't know who the Jewish people were really very well. I certainly didn't know anything about the Muslim people, so it's confusing. It's hot here, dry. But then at the end of the summer, I had this experience over at the Western Wall, what they used to call the Wailing Wall, that just woke me up to the importance of the story of the Jews for Christianity. And so after that, gradually, I began coming here more often. I would bring students from Assumption College. So I made like 21, 22 different trips here over the course of those years.
Father Barry, thank you for coming on Signals. This is fantastic.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Ted, as always.
Oh, thanks. Hey, maybe we should cover the basics. Would you mind doing a life review for me? Talking about where you started and how you got to where you are.
Right now, I'm not quite that far north. I'm in Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut, and I'll be serving also in Igloolik and Senarayak, which are at the other end of, which are further north of here. This place is south of the Arctic Circle. The other three places are north of the Arctic Circle. So I don't know, my education, I went to Catholic schools all my life, just about. When it was time for college, I was a student in high school in Florida, Catholic high school in Florida. Had no idea where to go to school. We didn't have guidance counselors then. You were just on your own. And my buddy, Mike Garrettson, and I, one day in the second half of our senior year said, oh, we better decide what we're going to do. And he went to see this nun that he had when he was in grade school in Florida. And I remember waiting out in his car while he went into the convent to visit her. And when he came out, he said, well, she says we should go to Assumption College in Worcester, Massachusetts, because her brother teaches there, and he's a great teacher. And the two of us sat in the car and talked ourselves into doing this. I had a scholarship to Catholic University, and he had one to Georgetown. And we decided to scuttle both of those and go to this completely unknown institution instead. I won't go into this, there are lots of stories about this, but I went to Assumption, and I really loved the education that I was receiving there. It was sort of a classical education. We studied Latin and philosophy, and I found that I loved philosophy, and I always wanted to be a priest, and I knew that priests training involved lots of philosophy, and I decided to major in philosophy with that in mind. When I was in high school, there was a vocation director who came to my high school, unbeknownst to me. My name was called over the loudspeaker, and the nun said I should report to the office. I thought I was in trouble, and I went in, and there was this big old crippled up priest behind the desk, and he said, "Well, son, here you want to be a priest." I said, "Yes, Father." He said, "You should come to the seminary in Miami." And I just blurted out and said, "No, Father." I hadn't any thought of this, but I just said no. He said, "Why not?" I said, I want to get an education on my own." And that ended the discussion. And so I did, and went to Assumption and did my 4 years of philosophy, but then did a whole bunch more. I went to Notre Dame in DC, continuing to study philosophy. It was a long delay before I finally got ordained. And all of this was in the years right after Vatican II. And so it was really a terrible time to be getting ordained or joining a religious community, because everything was so in flux and uncertain. It caused me personally just a great deal of misery, trying to find my way with a lot of religious leaders who were bozos. They didn't know what to do in light of Vatican II, and so my aim of getting an education on my own sort of expanded to figuring out on my own, more or less, how to proceed with my vocation. So it was a long time out, a long time before I finally got ordained. And just before being ordained, the summer before my ordination, my novice master at the time, who became my superior, he said, "Why don't you go to our house in Jerusalem for the summer?" And my thought was, Jerusalem? Why would I go to Jerusalem? It was just never on my bucket list, oddly. And so I said, no, I think I'll just stay around. But then the alternative was to be at our house in Brookline, which was a very pretty place and the most boring place on earth. And I thought, I'll do anything to avoid going there. I'll even go to Jerusalem. So I agreed to go to Jerusalem, and I was there for 3 months. It was a completely disorienting experience. The encounter with the Muslim world for the first time, but the encounter with the Jewish world, the encounter with the Mideast, with the weather that they had there, this incredibly hot, dry weather. I was dehydrated all the time. But in the end, I found that I had been deeply moved by the life and story of the Jewish people. I had an experience down at the Western Wall a week before I came back to the U.S., where I won't go into a description of that experience, but I prayed there, and so something hit me. And after that, I said, I have to get to know the Jewish people. And that experience, well, it disappeared for a while. I came back to the U.S. and started teaching philosophy. But over the next 3 years or so, I got ordained, was teaching. Everything began to fall apart. My connection with the community was a disaster. I was fracturing, and I took off. I got a leave of absence and took out a map. This was the beginning of the journeys north. I took out a map of North America and saw this little village in the middle of nowhere in central Quebec, and found out who the bishop was in charge of this place, and gave him a call and said, I'm taking a leave of absence from my community. And do you need somebody in this town, Barin, Quebec?
So you were just taking you took a dart and just threw it and
I just held up the map. I held up the map and saw that there was this town in the middle of a huge area of forest.
Yeah.
And I said, that's the place.
So
And
this was precipitated by this experience. Just back up a second. What was that experience like that you had in Israel, where you had this
all right.
this
Okay.
change of thought, or this
Yeah.
epiphany?
Okay. I had no money when I was there, and so I was limited in the things I could do. We lived, the Assumptionist house was very close to the Western Wall, and it was a kind of a thrilling place to be. You'd go there, and day or night, there are always lots of people there. You see Jews from all over the world singing, dancing, weeping, praying. Groups of soldiers taking an oath to defend Israel with their lives if it was necessary. It was really, I never lost interest in just looking at that. Before that, in front of the Western Wall, there's a great big plaza, and more immediately before it, there's a barrier. And if you cross over the barrier, if you go in the barrier, you're technically in a synagogue area there, immediately before the wall. And out of respect for the Jews, I never went into the enclosed area. But this last week when I was there, I was back there one evening, and there was this big Jewish guy, big Orthodox looking Jewish guy, who sounded like he was from New York. And he just, I didn't know him from Adam. And he came up to me and he said, "What's the matter with you?" What is that? He said, "You're here every night. You don't go in. Go in."
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, I'm being watched. Okay, what's going on? But number two, if you have an invitation from somebody like this, you can go in. So I put on one of these little cardboard teapot that they have there, and went and up to the wall and leaned into the wall. And then it was like, I don't know, something happened. This rush of feeling came over me.
Yeah.
It was just completely overwhelming. And when I backed away from the wall, I said to myself, what was that? What was that? And I realized I tried to articulate what I was being made aware of in it. And it was, number one, God is as close to me as the warmth of those Herodian stones that make up the wall. He's as distant from me as if separated by those giant stones. And I have an older brother who knew me, but whom I never knew. That was the way it shaped itself. And that older brother was the Jews. And just as a coincidence, I did have an older brother that I never knew, that I met sometime later. My father had a family I didn't know about. Then, but the crucial thing here was that I thought, I feel like I have to get to know this older brother, the Jewish people. So I came back to Assumption and started teaching, and I just forgot all about this. But like I said, everything fell apart. Then I went up to Quebec, and the bishop put me in charge of the parish in this little village, little francophone parish. I had to spark what little French I had to life to preach there. Anyway, while I was there, my first year, I was there for just 2 years. The first year I said, this is a year where I shut up. I've been teaching all these. I've been teaching at high school when you were a student, and I was teaching at Assumption, and now I was going to spend a year. I was not going to read much. I was not going to write. I would do my tiny little homilies in French, but I was going to be quiet. And then the second year, I came back to the U.S. and I got a computer and went back to Courant and started writing. And I just wrote sort of randomly. I produced 7 little dialogues, I call them. And in them, these 2 characters are talking about life and all that stuff. And eventually, toward the end of in the 7th dialogue, one of them starts talking about the Jews. And that was it. That was the moment when what struck me in Jerusalem came to life again. It was like a seed that suddenly poked its head above the soil. And after that, I just wanted to learn everything I possibly could about the Jews. And what I realized, well, it was also around this time that the church was changing its sort of official attitude toward the Jews. In the Second Vatican Council, in one of the smallest documents that the council produced, Nostra Aetate, the council just quietly opened the door to considering that the covenant that the Jews have is living invalid. It wasn't a bold statement. It was, but it was a changing in the relationship with the Jews. And I was thinking while I was in Courant there, and ever since, I thought, for my whole education, the teaching was that the Jews were God's chosen people, but with the crucifixion of Jesus, they had lost that status. God terminated his covenant with them, and we replaced the Jews. We were the true Israel, Veris Israel, they used to call it. The church fathers who were talking about this stuff. We replaced them, and they were out. And that was the sort of standard teaching. And I thought, well, at first I thought, Vatican II can't change this teaching. This is a very well established teaching. But my experience in Jerusalem was that these people were not abandoned by God. They remained very much his chosen people. And so I thought, the council was right. The former teaching was wrong. This was a very disturbing thing for a guy who was brought up as a conservative Catholic. But I think that the old teaching was wrong. And this was not an inconsequential teaching. This was a teaching about the origin of Christianity.
Well, it divides the human race in a way. I mean, it keeps the Jews and Christians separate, and I don't think that's God's will.
I certainly don't think so. And it kept the Jews separate in a really bad way. I mean, they were sort of separated from the plan of salvation. They were no longer part of the picture. Later on, the people who quote St. Paul say, at the end of the world, the Jews will recognize Jesus and everything will be okay. But I don't buy that picture of things. What the Jews went through since the time of Christ, and especially in the 20th century and right now, one night when I was visiting the Western Wall, I was with an evangelical buddy I was hanging out with at the time, whom I lost contact with. I'd love to get in contact with him again. Maybe he'll be one of the listeners to your podcast here.
Very possible.
We're standing at this elevated area above the plaza, and I said, "Gosh, it's so amazing, the piety, the religious seriousness of these Jews." And he said, yeah, too bad they're all going to hell.
Oh,
And I thought, I mean, your reaction was my reaction. I didn't laugh, I don't think, but I kind of
no.
gasped. And thought, this does not make sense, you know. And so anyway, I became very convinced that the former teaching concerning the status of the Jews was wrong. But if you change that teaching, you aren't changing. It's not like, you know, one little component in your computer that needs to be replaced. You change that teaching has ramifications on all of Christian teaching. It changes your understanding of what Jesus is doing, who Jesus is, and who consequently we are. And I think to bring this part of the discussion to a close, I guess, since you're asking about my education, that's where my education began anew. When I began to ask myself, what does it mean if we say the covenant of the Jews is still living and valid? What are the effects of that for a Christian or a Catholic Christian? And that question has animated me since those days. So it's been a long time now that I've been thinking about it. And I still do. This morning I was at the Black Heart Cafe. There's a cafe here in town where I go, so I won't have to be answering the telephone. And I write. This is my current journal book. I've been doing this every day for a long time now, thinking through the various ways that this shift made by Vatican II affects us.
Yeah. Well, I've read your book, Skies of Babylon. It covers this concept of diversity in the university, and in my opinion, you can speak to this. This notion of diversity actually serves to divide us. It seems to take away individualism and promotes a sort of conformity. And I'm wondering, do you think that the university has served as an incubation place for some kind of, it sounds like strong words, but tyranny?
Yeah, I think that's I do. I think that the progressive ideology, so unlike the kind of education Assumption College used to give, and I think some quarters over there it still does. The progressive education that you see all over the place now. Well, let me back it up a little bit. What's behind this progressive diversity stuff and ultimately tyranny stuff, totalitarianism, is this, that and this gets us into a problem that the Bible, Jewish book, considers with unequaled profundity, I think. All political associations in the past were religious, and before the revolutions of the modern world. To be a political thing, to be ancient Athens or ancient Rome or ancient Babylon, any of them, big ones, little ones, all of them were religious in character. All politics was religious. You might even say politics was religion, and religion was politics. It's still the case with Islam. Islam is a political religious system. But Islam's an outlier in the modern world. But in antiquity, all political associations were religious. Without going into all of what happened at all, with modernity, this comes to an end. The old order is done away with. There were rebellions against altar and throne, and you end up with an attempt at a political system that is based entirely on human reason and action, without reference to anything beyond man, any transcendent reality. That means that man is absolute sovereign over man, and that translates very swiftly into some men are absolute sovereigns over everybody else. There's nothing to put a limit on the exercise of human power, and that means there's nothing to exercise a limit on the exercise of human power over human beings. And that's the situation in the modern world. And with the progressives who are running the universities, this is their aim. Their aim is to expand human power, like through the natural sciences, power over nature, but that swiftly becomes power to be used over human beings. And it isn't limited to the natural sciences. It goes to the social sciences, where you find out how the art of human manipulation and control. What makes human beings tick? You can figure out what that is, then you can control them. Psychological science, use these drugs to accomplish this effect. Sociological science, do this to get this kind of social effect. We're treating ourselves like the objects of science. And so the progressives in the university say, well, here's the university. It's the place where you learn science. And the unacknowledged goal of that is the aim of this science is the imposition of a vision of order on human beings, from which there is no escape. It becomes, and on which there's no transcendent limit. And that's what totalitarianism is. It's absolute, unbounded human control of human beings. And that's the progressive goal.
Well, they're making good progress. I heard a politician, Lindsey Graham, this morning say, we are in a holy war. And that's the politician saying that. I wonder if you could comment on that when you consider what's going on in Israel right now.
Yeah. Well, it's complex, because in a way he's right. Hamas and the Islamist groups there, they certainly conceive of what they're doing as jihad, as holy war. Israel doesn't use that kind of language, but Israel is absolutely determined to preserve its life as Israel, as the nation of the Jews, and it's a way for the Jews to go on living. When Netanyahu gave his speech, what was it, yesterday or the day before, he ended his speech by saying, Am Israel Chai, people of Israel lives, and they mean to live, and they mean it with great seriousness. After the Holocaust, when so many of them went like sheep to the slaughter, they look at that and they say, no more. Don't ask us to go and just sacrifice ourselves to some hideous totalitarian scheme. Okay, we won't do it. And they mean it. When Joe Biden talks about what he's going to do, you don't have the sense that he means it. We watched him give this very emotional speech yesterday in defense of Israel, and all I could think was, boy, I don't believe him. It's like listening to a hologram. Is there anybody actually there? But the Israelis mean it, and so in a way, it is like a holy war. And one of the things that I would say is that the modern attempt to get rid of something like the transcendent or the divine or the religious in politics is impossible. Human beings always want to have a sense of how what they are doing fits into the great whole of things, the divine plan or the metaphysical order, however you put it. They want something ultimate in terms of which they order their lives. So you can say, well, we're just secular. We can do it on our own. We do it without reference to the divine. We'll be happy living for the stuff we can buy at Walmart and a nice shiny car and a house with a lawn. But human beings are not happy with that. And so it's not by accident that the progressives are all, so many of them are very, very wealthy, comfortable people. They have everything that the system is to give to them, and they're profoundly dissatisfied. And so they want to bring about some kind of great transformation of the universe to do what God didn't do. They want to be God. But
Yeah.
well, I'm not quite sure now where I'm going with what I was saying.
No, I'm with you all the way. They're proponents of change, but their lives are solid and secure. But they want to change. They want us to do what they want us to do. I think that's what you're trying to say.
And what they want is the destruction of all transcendent limits. Okay, and then that shows up concretely in things like the division between the sexes. Okay, there's a limit. Okay, to produce life, you have to have a male and female of the species. Well, they just want to ignore that. This is say that no, this is just gender, and gender is fluid. There are 30,000 different genders. It's just extraordinarily absurd.
It is, but it's so mainstream.
It's mainstream because the self-understanding of modernity is we don't need the divine. We have to keep religion. Religion is merely a private belief. It's indistinguishable from mental disease. You keep it off the public arena.
Well, it's another example of control, of controlling thought, controlling concepts.
They do away with ideas like nature and replace those old ideas with ideas of progress and progress that we produce by controlling human beings.
You wanted to talk about the current situation in Israel, and I think we talked about giving hope to Catholics and Christians alike.
Yeah.
In this period.
Well, I was thinking of talking about what's happening in Israel now as an example of what has been happening with the Jewish people forever. People talk about anti-Semitism and say, we have to fight against anti-Semitism. There's no way you're getting rid of anti-Semitism. The roots of anti-Semitism are extremely deep, and the Bible is perfectly aware of this. The self-understanding of the Jews is that God has chosen them and set them apart as a people peculiarly his own, as it says in the preface of the Mass somewhere. God to be holy as a Jew. The word for holy, kadosh, means set apart, separated. That the Jews separate themselves from everybody else, and it's not out of vanity. It's out of this sense that this is what they were called to do ever since the days of Abraham. Abraham is called to leave Babylon. Moses is called to bring the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. The Jews are set apart because they're brought into relationship with God. And the set apartness, it means that there's a difference. They're different. And the difference, see if I can keep clear about this. The difference is in their attitude, among other things, in their attitude toward political power. Abraham is called away from Babylon. Moses away from Egyptian power. Jesus is crucified under the political power of Rome. And Jesus' resurrection from the dead is a judgment on Rome. The Bible has a fairly negative attitude toward what we call civilization. This is very hard to swallow. Who's the builder of the first city? Cain, after the murder of his brother Abel. That's the origin of the city. And then in the next generation, you see Cain's offspring, and they start producing the arts of civilization, music and metalwork and all this stuff. And you see this moving straight to well, not straight, but they get very quickly to Babylon, where everything is artificial. You have brick instead of stone, and bitumen instead of mortar, and the words themselves are all twisted and bent. The disposition of the Bible towards civilization tends to be negative. It sees civilization as the product of people like Cain, who murder and who need to protect themselves from being murdered. So they build these walled things that in the ancient days they called cities. Our cities don't usually have physical walls, but they have iron domes and things like that that are necessary to protect themselves. The story of the Jews that's told in the Old Testament is the story of the Jews coming out of Egypt and going eventually to the Promised Land. And then, while they're there building up their nation, they have a big enemy, the Philistines, and they're worried about their security. And they go to their prophet, Samuel. He was a kind of a religious leader. And they say, Samuel, you're an old guy, you're going to die pretty soon, your sons are jerks. We need someone to rule over us like you did, but we need a permanent institution. That is, we need monarchy. We need a king and a household of a king that will endure across the generations and rule us like the rest of the nations. And Samuel says, terrible idea. God is and Samuel goes to God. He says, they want to have a king. And God says, well, they aren't rejecting you. They are rejecting me. And then God says, give them a king. And so you get Saul, who's a great failure as a king. David, who's a great success, but ambiguous in lots of ways. Solomon, who looks like the golden boy, who builds up Jerusalem and the other cities, builds the temple, and does something really, really wrong. Solomon is the builder. David was the warrior. Solomon, his son, is the builder. And he wants to build up Israel and really make it like the rest of the nations. And he does it by making alliances with lots of them. When it says Solomon loved many women, many foreign women. And he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Okay, 700 plus 300, that's 1,000. That's a lot. But as I used to tell my students, it's not because Solomon is a horny old guy. These are alliances.
Of course.
And political alliances. And he builds the temple and says, now, God, all of your promises that you made to Moses are fulfilled through my temple. Because of my temple, people from all over the world will come and be amazed at this temple and come to know you. But because of these alliances, when you made an alliance with somebody, you built a temple in their country to your God. And so Jerusalem started filling up with temples from all over the place, all these different, the Mount Zion and the area around the temple, the Jewish temple, filled up with these pagan temples. Right below our house, the Assumptionist house in Jerusalem, is the Hinnom Valley, Gehenna, at the bottom of which was a temple to, what the heck is the name of that guy? Moloch, to whom you offered child sacrifice. They threw babies into fire to worship Moloch. This is going on in Jerusalem under Solomon. And the result is that the experiment with monarchy begins to fail. It takes a while, but the rest of the story of the monarchy in Israel is mostly the story of deeper and deeper decline. There's a civil war in Israel. The northern kingdom separates from Jerusalem, builds another temple, and finally, the northern kingdom, which had 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel, is conquered by Assyria, carried off into exile, and vanishes. And then all that's left basically is the tribe of Judah. And a generation or two later, Judah is captured by another foreign power, and it's taken off into exile. And what is that other foreign power? It's Babylon, the place from which Abraham had been called like 1,500 years before. It's the most astonishing tale.
So it goes in full circle.
Yeah, they're back to go.
Yeah, the human administration just keeps failing. Is that a way you might put it?
It's Israel attempting to be like the rest of the nation that brings Israel's particular failure. They aren't destroyed. They go into exile in Babylon, and then after 70 years, they come out of it. They survive that exile, but they survive it as wiser people. Over the course of that exile in Babylon, they say to themselves, we're the only ones left of our people. We all screwed up phenomenally. It was a big mistake to be just another political system like everybody else. Claiming the kind of sovereignty and power that Solomon was looking for is not to be our kettle of fish. This is not what we're to do. And this, in a way, becomes the beginning of what we call Judaism. It's the tribe of Judah that survives. And the Judahites, when they come back, say, more important than the temple, more important than political power, is Torah. We stick to the word of God. We learn it well. We drill it into the heads of our kids. This is our memory. This is our self-understanding. This is the story of how we failed, but have learned from that failure. And so the Jews learned to be really and truly a people set apart who reject the sovereign claims of all the nations. And this is why the nations hate them. The Jews stand as a radical alternative to what the other nations and civilizations aim at.
Well, as they were called to come out and be separate, and that's what's happened at this point.
They learned that the Bible was put together in light of the experience of the exile in Babylon. It was in Babylon and shortly after Babylon that the texts that the Jews had been producing over the centuries were edited. Certain texts were chosen as the really authoritative texts. And they put it all together as the canon of the Old Testament. And it's put together in such a way as to tell this story and to teach the Jews that they are not to be like the rest of the nations who invoke their gods to justify the use of political power. And this shows up so clearly in things like the first three of the 10 Commandments. When I was in a school kid, probably the same for you, Catholic kids learned the first commandment as, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no strange gods before me. Okay, that's not what it says in the text. It says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, that place of slavery. You shall have no other gods beside me. That's a different understanding there. That God is saying, I'm your God, but this is who I am. I'm the one who brought you out from there. Okay, what's the call to Abraham? Abraham, lech lecha, get yourself going out of there. Leave Babylon. What does Moses say to Pharaoh? Let my people go. Get out. Since in the book of Revelation too, when this angel says, get out of her, my people. Get out of Babylon. So this is the lesson that the Jews learn, and to a large extent they put into practice. It was imposed on them in a way. I mean, because after the time of the generation after Jesus, the Romans and the Jews go to war with each other, and the Jews are kicked out of their land. Any chance they have for monarchy or that sort of thing is gone, and they live in exile all over the place for a very long time. But they stick with what they learned from Torah, and so they don't lose their identity. And when they're in the prayer service in the synagogue, always they would be praying for a return to the land of Israel and the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem and the temple. They did that for 2,000 years. And then with the shift in things that took place that produced the Holocaust, then Jews began to say, we can no longer live in exile. We'll get killed out here. We have to return to the land. And so they did. That return to the land, that the Holocaust and the return to the land of Israel, these two gigantic events in the modern world. I mean, these are events on a biblical scale concerning the people of God, the Jews, that are events that everybody can see. That what used to be Christendom attempted the total annihilation of every Jew in the world, and focused on that with terrifying intensity and success.
You're saying the Christian world, as it was established, that attitude contributed to this animosity toward the Jews. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that Christendom is this strange thing that develops in the early days of Christianity, when the Roman Empire is in a state of serious crisis. It's falling apart, and there's a crisis of faith. The Romans, many of the Romans simply cannot believe in the Roman gods anymore. Constantine comes along, and he's sometimes presented as the saintly guy who's a Christian and wants to convert the whole world to Christianity. But first of all, he's a Roman emperor who sees the crisis that's going on, who sees the rise of Christianity and the decline of paganism. And what effectively he says, Rome needs to recharge its political religion. We'll use Christianity. And you get this new political order that has Christianity as its religion. The Jews made the mistake of using their religion to promote a political power. That's what's the story of the Old Testament. Romans and Christians end up doing the same thing, where they take Christianity and say, we're going to use this to preserve our civilization.
Oh, so it's parallel.
And that is parallel. And then that civilization, Christendom, over the centuries morphs and turns into the modern world. And that's the world that goes after the Jews in this extraordinary sort of a way. I don't think I'm being very clear, but
no, I think you are. So we're still in this mode where politics dominates. It's a secular world, and
It's what
we're still being called out. We haven't extracted ourselves from this secular
this is the
political
human
attitude.
this is the situation of the human race. I think that the Bible sees it, that human beings are created for what the Bible calls a covenantal relationship with each other and with God. But instead they go for these power relations where human beings are in charge and not God. It's the story of Adam and Eve and the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God creates them to be his free covenantal partners. They say, no, thanks. We want to be in charge. We will have the knowledge of good and evil ourselves. We will determine what's good and evil. And we screw up the creation. And when God calls Abram out of Babylon, he's saying, this is not what I wanted, Babylon. I wanted something of a very different sort. And you, Abram, are going to be the beginning of it. And the Jewish people are the continuation of that. And with Christ, Christians, followers of Christ, are to be continuation of that. But the impulse is always the impulse of Adam to say, I want to be in charge, and I have a vision of religion that should be, sort of set up in the temple in the center of the city, and in terms of that, we govern. It sounds really good in a way. And Christendom was like that. It was this exercise of classical Greco-Roman civilization, using Jesus, using the stories of the Bible to build a fairly fantastic civilization. But this is, was Jesus' intention in dying on the cross to be the founder of the political religion of the empire that crucified him? It's kind of a strange conception. But it is the conception of Christendom. The point to myself, okay, what was my job? What was I doing when I was trying to teach you guys at St. Bernard's High School? I was trying to draw you into the civilization of Christendom.
Well, you did a good job.
Well, but it was the wrong thing to do. This is what I'm thinking, that to put it more simply, the purpose of Christianity is not the building of civilization. It's true that a civilization without wise religion is going to be a hellhole, but that doesn't mean that the coming of the word of God into the world is for the sake of building civilization.
No, it's about our personal salvation, right?
Well, I hesitate to say exactly what it's about, but it's something like personal salvation. But what exactly that means becomes difficult to say. There's mystery here and depth that is hard to fathom.
I guess I was talking. Go ahead.
Well, if I put it more, when Christianity becomes the state religion of Rome, it becomes it's a very sophisticated thing. Okay, Greco-Roman civilization had Greek philosophy, Roman law and order. It's a very complex, powerful, impressive civilization, and Christianity enables Rome to be this extraordinary civilization. I mean, I used to so love and admire Catholicism because it seemed to contain all these riches of Western civilization. The literature, the art, the law, the architecture. There's nothing like it, and ideas of freedom that we love so much. This comes from Scripture. There was all kinds of wonderful stuff that went into the Roman or Western order because of Christianity. But you could still ask this question: is that what Jesus does? Is establish this religion for the sake of this enormously powerful and sophisticated empire? Was it my job as a priest teaching to transmit the cultural riches of this empire? This question takes on a different tone when you come to a place like I'm at right now, with the Inuit people. They were not part of the story of the Roman Empire. Okay, they were living separate from everybody else for the longest time, for like 4,000 years. They were disconnected from most of the rest of. They were disconnected from human civilizations. But they had a way of life very, very difficult, but with a certain dignity to it. Anyway, 100 and some years ago, the white man, they call him the Kadluna. Kadluna is not a nice word for white people when they call you a Kadluna.
It doesn't sound too nice.
It's not nice. But when the Kadluna came to the north, we bring this gigantic civilization, which annihilates the Inuit way of life. And who was it that brought this civilization? It was partly the missionaries. Missionaries are coming to bring Christ to the Inuit, but they bring this gigantic civilization, which annihilates, which just destroys their way of life.
Yeah, so the indigenous people's lives get uprooted by the civilization that is sort of dragged along with the evangelists.
Yeah, the evangelists couldn't. They themselves, like me at St. Bernard's, didn't distinguish between the gospel message or the message of the scriptures and you might say the missionary activity of Western civilization. They didn't distinguish between those two things.
So we have a lot of work to do, it seems, from this point, because
I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do.
I guess we can only go day by day.
I was talking about these things with my community back in Brighton one day. One of the older guy from my generation, who's a wise guy in a good sense. Mm-hmm. He just said, "Yeah, but what are you supposed to do about all this?" And I had nothing to say.
Well, things have got to such a point that the things are so discouraging and dangerous and violent and hostile. I mean, what can one person do? I mean, we can only pray, right?
I think there is a little something you can do, which is a thing that I was thinking about when we decided to have this conversation. And that's for us to pay attention again to the Jewish people. Because for whatever flaws they may have, and they're human beings like the rest of us, so there are all kinds of mess that gets involved in all this. Still, there are a lot of serious Jews who have this sense of being set apart, who are pushed out of the realm of most civilizations by most civilizations. The anti-Semitism separates the Jews, and in a certain sense preserves their special difference. They are very strongly attached to the land of Israel right now. It's what they have to have in order to survive. But they have this long experience of living without political power. That's really what has formed their self-understanding over the past couple thousand years. So there, I mean, there are strange groups of serious religious Jews in Israel who refuse to recognize the existence of the state of Israel. Very, very odd to see. But what it reflects is this serious understanding that the Jews can have, that the project of being a Jew is not identifiable with any political project. And I think that Catholics have to learn something like that. That, you know, after Christendom began to fail in the West, Catholics got on board another ship, which was called social justice. You know, if we aren't going to conceive ourselves as the pillars of Greco-Roman civilization, we'll become the pillars of Western democracy, and we will impose democratic notions of social justice.
Yeah, the roots of wokeness.
It's the roots of wokeness, and it's a big mistake. And I think that this is going to sound very depressing, I guess, but all civilizations die. They all die. The Jews are the witnesses to that. They've survived a multitude of great, powerful, sophisticated civilizations that tried to dominate them and then disappeared. And I think it's not. I think the reality is that the civilization that we're in is dying, and that's, you know, it was my life project was to teach that stuff, and now I have to say, you know, it's just going away.
Are you talking about Christianity and Judaism, or both,
no,
or either? Both.
I think Christians and Jews are both called to stand above the fray of collapsing civilizations.
Sounds like a hard job.
It's very difficult, and I'm not sure how you navigate those waters. But I think like the Jews who came out of Babylon, you recognize that you have to make sure that your mind is clear, that you're looking at things the way the Word of God reveals them. That things are not the way they are, the way that civilizations project them to be. That the great goals and ambitions of civilization are not the ambitions of the people of God. They aren't the ambitions of Jesus. You know, when Jesus gives the Sermon on the Mount, what's the first thing he says? Blessed are you poor. The kingdom of heaven is yours. Okay, not Rome. The kingdom of heaven is yours. And for the rich and powerful, well, okay, you get Rome. But the followers of Jesus are aiming at something else. And what could be a stronger and more terrifying image of that than the crucifixion? What's it say above the cross? You know, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, murdered by the Romans.
Well, it's like the church itself now is going through a crucifixion, or going underground, or going into the tomb, perhaps to resurrect again.
You know, I take Jesus at his word. You know, the gates of hell won't prevail against it, but that doesn't mean that the institutions of what used to be Christendom are going to prevail. They aren't going to prevail. They're going to go under. What will take its place, how it will look, I have no idea.
Yeah, things are going to continue to unfold. We shall see, right?
Well, some people will see I'll be dead soon, no doubt. But
I keep laughing at all these horrible images. I don't know why. Probably because you were my teacher and you used to tell us such great stories, such horrible stories concerning in the Iliad. You would paint these battle scenes and all these gory happenings, and I would laugh because of your ability to. You were able to paint these graphic pictures that I could see like a movie, and they really had an effect on me. I guess it's a good place to wrap it up. We'll continue at another time. Thank you, Father Barry.
Okay, bye-bye.